We'll begin in a minute, inshallah ta'ala. طيب، بسم الله إن شاء الله تعالى نبدأ في درسنا بإذن الله. وقفنا عند شروط الجماعة. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى التوفيق والسداد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، وبعد. يقول المصنف رحمه الله تعالى: شروط الجماعة 6. الأول ألا يتقدم على إمامه وتكره مساواته. التقدم على الإمام means to stand ahead of the Imam. And this على المعتمد, على the معتمد, the standard accepted opinion, is not accepted. وتكره المساواة. المساواة means to be at the same level as the Imam. كلام جميل. Now, it does not harm, it's just makruh. Why? Because normally people, they still move around while they're in salah. So it is always possible that going down too far, coming back up, you might wind up standing ahead of the Imam. Now, what's the problem? If you stand ahead of the Imam, what does that do to your salah? تُبْطِلُ الصَّلَاةِ. تُبْطِلُ. That's it. The salah is no longer accepted. And this is according to the Jadid. In the Qadim, he said it would still be okay. But the Mu'tamad is the Jadid, not the Qadim. الثاني أن يجمعهما مسجد أو فضاء ولم يزد ما بينهما على 300 ذراع. كلام جميل. And this is a famous mas'ala. This mas'ala originally has 2 tariq. And the tariq, or the turuq, happened because of them trying to pinpoint the distance in an open field. And the way that Imam al-Nawawi in al-Minhaj worded it, it's almost like the best rhyme you've ever heard. He says, ولو كان بفضاء شرط ألا يزيد ما بينهما على 300 ذراع تقريبا، وقيل تحديدا فإن تلاحق شخصان أو صفان اعتبرت المسافة بين الأخير والأول، وسواء الفضاء المملوك والوقف والمبعض، ولا يضر الشارع المطروق والنهر المحوج إلى سباحة على الصحيح، فإن كان في بنائين كصحن وصفة أو بيت فطريقان، أصحهما إن كان بناء المأموم يمينا أو شمالا وجب اتصال صف من أحد البنائين بالآخر، ولا تضر فرجة لا تسع واقفا في الأصح، وإن كان خلف بناء الإمام فالصحيح صحة القدوة بشرط ألا يكون بين الصفين أكثر من 3 أذرع، والطريق الثاني لا يشترط إلا القرب كالفضاء إن لم يكن حائل أو حال باب نافذ. And it goes on. And subhanallah, it's like the words of this fasl in Minhaj were like cut from semi-melted butter. It's the easiest, one of the easiest verses in the middle of a book that you could memorize. Now, the earlier books, when they spoke about the fada, yani praying outside in the wilderness, in jama'ah, the distance between the imam and the ma'mum should not be more than ghuluwat sahm. Ghuluwat sahm is the average distance an arrow would go by an archer, which would be somewhere in between 150 and 180 meters approximately. Kalam Jamil. Now, that was translated later on from ghuluwat sahm to 300 dhira. نعم. الثالث أن يعلم بانتقالات الإمام بأن يراها أو يرى بعض المأمومين أو يسمعه أو يسمع المبلغ. That the person following in jama'ah, he knows the moves that the imam is making in the salah. That's by him actually seeing him, hearing him, seeing the lines ahead of him, the rows in congregation ahead of him, or he hears the muballigh. The muballigh used to be a person that would stand towards the middle, towards the end of a masjid and repeat the takbirat and the harakat of the imam. So if the imam said Allahu Akbar, you'd hear someone all the way in the back saying Allahu Akbar. Jameel. Now, with the invention of microphones, that pretty much, that profession pretty much ended in existence. However, a lot of communities in Egypt, for example, they still keep it even with the microphone to keep that tradition. The fourth condition of congregation, أن ينوي الاقتداء به أو الائتمام أو الجماعة, to intend following the imam or to imitate the imam or to intend that they're going to pray in jama'ah. And this is especially for the ma'mum only, not the imam. He says the fifth, أن توافق صلاته صلاة إمامه. The moves that he's making are the same as the moves the imam is making. فلا تصح صلاة الكسوف خلف صلاة المكتوبة. Now, the prayer of kusuf has completely different structure, looks completely different than your regular salah. So you couldn't pray that prayer behind the imam in a salah that's maktuba. Why? Because they're two different types of prayers altogether. ولا تصح الصبح خلف الجنازة. Janazah prayer, there's no ruku', there's no sujood in it. So you can't pray subh while the imam is in janazah. ولا الجنازة خلف الصبح. Or pray janazah while the imam is praying salat al-subh. Number 6, أن يتابعه. He follows the acts of the imam in order and in the same time the imam is doing. So imam makes a move, he makes that same move. Now, sometimes things happen and the imam goes a little bit faster than the ma'mum. So the condition and the rule here states, فَلَوْ تَقَدَّمَ عَلَى إِمَامِهِ بِرُكْنَيْنِ فِعْلِيَيْنِ. What is a rukn fi'li? A rukn al-fi'li is an actual act, like ruku', like i'tidal, like sujood. These are ruknayn fi'liyayn, physical acts. If he is ahead of the imam by 2, أو تخلف عنه بركنين فعليين طويلين, or he is 2 actions that are considered arkan, integrals, right? طويلين, What does طويلين mean? It means things like ruku' and sujood and tashahhud. كلام جميل. Not like اعتدال and جلوس بين السجدتين. These are called أركان قصيرة. أركان قصيرة. They are short أركان. كلام جميل. But the تخلف here is talking about طويل. أركان فعلية طويلة. بغير عذر. نعم. If there is a عذر, كلام جميل, then it is okay for you to be ahead or behind the imam. And he gives us examples. بعذر كبطء القراءة عذر إلى 3 أركان طويلة. The imam is reading quickly. He finished reading. You're still wrapping up al-Fatiha. He goes down for ruku'. Before you could even finish your Fatiha, he's back up from ruku'. How many acts did he do that are tawil? 1. What is it? The ruku'. Because i'tidal is not a rukn tawil. It is a rukn qasir. All right. Then he goes down for sujood. And you're still at wala dallin. And he sits up. Kalam Jameel. His sitting. What is that? That's ruknun qasir. It's not tawil. If he goes down to that next one, and you're not already in ruku' at this point, then all you have is as soon as he ends that second sujood, and you have not gotten to ruku' yet, khalas, it's over. Because now 3 arkan tawila. Jameel. And that concludes the shurut here. So in conclusion, do not step ahead of the imam in congregation. It's makruh to be at the same level. If you're praying in an open area, there shouldn't be more than 190 meters at most between you and him. You know what the imam is doing, so you can follow him. You're following him correctly. You have the correct intention to follow him. You're praying a similar type of prayer, okay, behind him. And you are caught up with the imam as best as possible. Unless there's an excuse, then your max would be 3 arkan tawila. Now we're moving on to Salat al-Musafir. He says, وَيَجُزْ لِلْمُسَافِرِ سَفَرًا طَوِيلًا مُبَاحًا وَهُوَ مَرْحَلَتَيْن قَصْرُ الظُّهْرِ وَالْعَصْرِ وَالْعِشَاءِ رَكْعَتَيْن. A person that's traveling a distance that is considered tawil. What is a safar tawil? A safar that is tawil means that you have passed masafat al-qasr. Masafat al-qasr is around 46 miles, approximately 76.5 kilometers. Some will just say 75. Jameel. An interesting side note to this point. A lot of the fuqaha have a lot of debate on defining what are the marhalatan. In some of the earlier frontier people in the Americas, when they came to travel from the East Coast in America to the West Coast, they used to actually sell these little survival books. And in these survival books, it told you exactly how long you could walk with your animal, how long you could travel. So there's a captain in the American Army. He wrote a book. It's called Prairie Traveler. And in it, he quotes a military specialist named Officer Galton, who stated that with cows and buffalo, they on average do a regular journey, and it's about approximately 4 hours or 24 miles, and then they need a rest. And this was called a trip. And on average, you could do 2 trips a day. With horses, he says if the road is clear enough that you're walking with them, then they're able to travel a total distance without needing any more than just a little nap of 176 miles. However, this is to be divided correctly over 6 days. Each day you do 1 trip. Each trip is approximately 30 miles. And that is the recommended traveling per day. If you are, you need to do more than that, you could do 2 trips a day, but then you're going to need some adequate resting afterwards. And they refer to that trip similar to how we refer to in our fiqh books as marhala. So a marhala for them, they're saying if the road is clear and everything's optimal, then you're looking at very close to 30 miles. Okay. That's very, very close to the estimates of the fuqaha. Not exact, but it's close to that. Again, most of the terrain that they're looking at is rocky, while the terrain our fuqaha we're looking at is more desert, heat a little bit harsher, etc. So that's speaking about a complete, the terrain is clean, it's easy, there's no obstructions, everything is perfect across the board. But again, that's on paper. In theory, it might not actually reach a 30 per trip, because things will definitely change that. That's it's an interesting thing to read and see, and it brings the whole idea of what our fuqaha are saying a little bit closer to our thought process. Now, if you are traveling this safar tawil, which would be 2 trips, kalam jameel, so that would be that approximately 75 kilometers or around 46 miles approximately, kalam jameel, then you have the right, if you're going that far, you have the right to shorten your prayers. You shorten dhuhr, asr, and isha from 4 to 2. Subh and maghrib, there's no shortening of them. He says, وَمَنْ فَاتَتْهُ صَلَاةٌ فِي السَّفَرِ وَقَضَاهَا فِي الْحَضَرِ أَوْ عَكْسُهُ أَتَمُّهَا. If you had a prayer to offer before you start traveling, and you start your travel, and you're in your traveling right now, and you're stopping to pray, you have to complete it, because it became an obligation upon you when you were a resident, not when you were a traveler. And the opposite as well. If it was an obligation upon you while you were traveling, instead you decided to hit the road, continue getting there until you get to your destination. At your destination, if you are now considered a muqim, a resident, then you're going to go ahead and pray it as if you're a resident. He says, وَيُشْتَرَطُ قَصْدُ مَوْضِعٍ مُعَيَّنٍ فَلَا يَقْصُرُ لِهَائِمٍ ولا يصلي خلف من يتم الصلاة أو شك أنه متم أو قاصر وأن ينوي القصر عند الإحرام. So he's saying here there's another set of conditions that we need to keep in mind. Number 1, you can only use the rukhas if you are a true traveler. from point A to point B. If you are wandering without an actual destination, then you cannot shorten the prayers because you're not a legitimate traveler. He says, and you, as a person shortening the prayer, should not pray behind someone completing the prayer, praying in its full. Maybe a non-traveler you ran into, Karam Jamil, or a person that you don't know if they're going to shorten or not. So when you do your ihram, you intend qasr, that you're shortening, and you should be praying behind someone that you know is shortening as well. He says, وَيَجُوزُ لِلْمُسَافِرِ سَفَرًا طَوِيلًا مُبَاحًا. And focus on mubah. Mubah means that the trip itself, the journey itself is mubah. If the trip itself, the journey itself is not considered mubah, it's not halal, it's not allowed for you, then you cannot do qasr, you cannot use any of the rukhas. Why? Because al-rukhas la tunatu bil ma'asi. Now, that's different than traveling a mubah travel, but committing a sin during that travel. That's ma'asiyah during safar. But it itself, the journey itself, is not a sin. الجمع بين الظهر والعصر تقديما أو تأخيرا أو بين المغرب والعشاء. Once you are a traveler, you get something called waqt al-udhr. Waqt al-udhr is basically where dhuhr and asr become one time block, and maghrib and isha become one time block. So since you are a person with a legitimate excuse, you have all of that time to pray both prayers. In other words, you can pray the prayer in either's time. Tamam. So if you bring them both earlier, then that's taqdeem. If you bring them both later, then that is ta'khir. That is ta'khir. He says, وَإِذَا جَمَعَ التَّقْدِيمِ فَيُشْتَرَطُ الْبُدَاءَةُ بِالْأُولَى وَنِيَّةُ الْجَمْعِ فِيهَا وَأَلَّا يَطُولَ الْفَصْلُ بَيْنَهُمَا. So if you're bringing both prayers earlier, then you begin with the first one. So we're talking about dhuhr and asr, then you're going to pray dhuhr, then you're going to pray asr. Kalam Jameel. He says, and you must intend that you are going to do jam' between those prayers, and that the duration of between you praying the first one and you praying the second one is not that long. So you should do it immediately, basically. You don't want to take breaks in between them. وَفِي جَمْعِ التَّأْخِيرِ. Now, if you're delaying both, the conditions are, he says, أن ينوي التأخير قبل خروج وقت الظهر وقبل خروج وقت المغرب. So back to our time blocks that we said. If you're going to pray both dhuhr and asr in the time of asr, then you intend, while it is still the official time of dhuhr, that you're going to be praying it in that other time. Same thing if you're speaking about Maghrib and Isha. In that time segment that actually belongs to Maghrib, not the whole time block, you're going to intend that you're praying it later on. And these are the basics for al-jam' wal-qasr wal-taqdeem wal-ta'khir. Inshallah ta'ala, all of that is clear. Now he moves on to Salat al-Jum'ah. He says, تجب الجمعة على كل مسلم مكلف ذكر حر مقيم بلا مرض. The Jum'ah prayer is an obligation upon every Muslim who is a mukallaf. What's a mukallaf? A person that's of age. They are sane They know what's being asked of them and they fulfill it. Tamam? Zakarin. This is an obligation upon males, men. Hurrin. Free. So slaves, this is not an obligation upon them. Tamam? Muqimin is an obligation upon a resident, not an obligation upon a traveler. Bila maradin, يعني there's no excuse that would be accepted in the Sharia that would stop you from going. ويعذر في ترك الجمعة والجماعة عند, and then he's going to move on to the exceptions. These are excuses that are accepted in the Sharia for you not attending congregation, and that congregation would include regular congregation or Jum'ah. Number one, it's raining, but what kind of rain? They said rain that does not keep you, or you don't have a way to stay dry from it. Kalam Jameel. And they'll use as an example, they'll say the sidewalks don't have umbrellas into them. Tamam. But if they do, or you have a car, Jameel, and it's not flooding, then, well, you should be able to go to the Jama'ah. Wal marad, sickness. If you're too sick to go. Jameel, if you're too sick to go, then you're too sick to go. What tamrid, caring for the sick. This is a udhr for you not to go to the congregation or the Jum'ah. وإشراف القريب ونحوه على الموت. This is number 4. Someone who's in their final moments, and you're there to offer support, to take care of them in those final moments. That's a legitimate excuse as well. وَالْخَوْفِ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ أَوْ مَالِهِ أَوْ عِرْضِهِ. The Sharia will never put you in harm's way. So if you are afraid, if you feel that you will not be safe going out for the prayer, for the congregation, then you don't have to go. That's a legitimate excuse. And that fear, safety issue is you, your family, your wealth, etc. ومدافعة الحدث مع سعة الوقت. You have to use the restroom and relieve yourself. And this is okay. You can delay going. But they say as long as there's time. Kalam Jameel. If there's no time and you could hold it and it's close enough, the majority of the Shafi'i would say go. Kalam Jameel. But if you have time, then you'll initiate relieving yourself. You'll initiate relieving yourself. ولا إشكال في ذلك. There's no harm there. Now, if while you were doing so, while you were relieving yourself, you missed the prayer, here you have an excuse. Because when you started it, there was enough time for you to finish it. It just, you weren't able to. Kalam Jameel. وشدة الجوع وشدة العطش, extreme hunger, extreme thirst. وشدة الحر والبرد, extreme heat, extreme cold, or extreme weather overall. كلام جميل. نعم. وشدة الريح بالليل, extreme wind at night. Because at night you won't be able to see وشدة الوحل, that means there's extreme mud in the roads. كلام جميل. وسفر الرفقة, يعني you are scheduled to travel, but there is a group of people that are going to travel now, right now, this minute. You could join them, or you can wait and pray and then travel alone. Which one do you do? No, it says you can go ahead and travel with your friends, with people, because traveling alone is usually dangerous. He says, وشروط الجمعة. Now we're moving on to the conditions of صلاة الجمعة. He says, number one, أن تكون كلها في وقت الظهر. The whole prayer needs to start and finish in the time of dhuhr. وأن تقام في نفس البلد. And since this pertains to residents only, this is happening in town. وألا تقام قبلها جمعة في تلك البلد. And no other Jum'ah is happening before it in that same town. Now I know a lot of people say, well, wait a minute. Half of the towns in the Middle East, they don't have this issue, or they don't follow this rule. Afwan, one moment. Assalamu alaikum. Afwan, I'm back. It's all khair, inshallah, just prolonged. Allah musta'an. Naam. So we were speaking in regards to the Jum'ah, only one Jum'ah taking place, and no Jum'ah in that same town commencing, happening before, during, or even after. Okay, it should only be one Jum'ah. So how do we respond to the fact that every Muslim country in all of Islamic history has had multiple Jum'ahs within the same town? Okay. First, let's backtrack it all the way to the beginning. In the beginning, no city had more than one masjid. In the beginning, every city, every town had only one. The first time we had a city so big where it had more than one was in Baghdad. However, when the issue came up, it turns out that Abu Yusuf, the student of Abu Hanifa, he had the Khalifa order all the bridges raised up. You know how they raise the bridge so a boat can go by? He'd have all the bridges raised up so that way one masjid on one side of the river and one masjid on the other side, and that way they're not connected. Then our ashab, they found it odd that Imam al-Shafi'i did not comment on what was happening in Baghdad. Some said that he didn't comment because there were too many people, so there had to be more than one. Others said no, he didn't comment because some of the scholars there viewed it okay, some of the Ahnaf, and therefore, why would he meet ijtihad with ijtihad? The issue is not mentioned verbatim in the Quran or Sunnah, right? Others said no, he was silent because of the river and the bridges were being lifted up. Others said no, he was silent because they were separate towns that, but with time, they connected but are still separate towns, so therefore it would be okay. Those are your four main breakdowns or takeaways from the whole incident of Baghdad. The Mutaakhirin of the Shafi'iyya, since the Baghdad scenario, that's gone. We haven't been in a Baghdad scenario since Imam al-Shafi'i himself. Okay, then how do they respond to it? Well, in Egypt and in Shem, the rule was this. The population was divided per masjid. So the number of masajid allowed to have a Jum'ah, right, is calculated by how much each masjid can take, what is its capacity, versus the population, and then only a certain number of masajid were allowed to be masajid of the Jum'ah prayer. And that's how they handled it. This is how we see great ulama of the Shafi'iyya like Ibn Firkah, Ibn Abi Sharif, Al-Bulqini, they all explain it this way, that they always divided the quantity of masajid plus their capacity divided upon the population. These are the amount of masajid that we're allowed to have in the town, right, for Jum'ah. If another masjid opens and tries to do Jum'ah, their Jum'ah is not valid. And up to probably 50 years ago, it was well documented. These masajid have no Jum'ah, these masajid are the ones that have Jum'ah. Why? Because of that rule. Until modern groups came and said, oh, well, no, we want our masjid, the one upon the sunnah, and they started neglecting that rule. But essentially, that was the rule that all the ulama followed, even from all the madhahib. Okay? All right. Number number 5, وأن تصلى في جماعة. Congregation, Jum'ah, is a prayer for congregation, and therefore it can only be done in congregation. Number 5, وأن يكونوا 40 ذكرا مكلفا حرا مستوطنا لا يطعن شتاء ولا صيفا إلا لحاجة. And here there's a lot of debate between the schools on how many people can pray Jum'ah. If you go through basic history, it appears as if the Prophet ﷺ did not initiate it until there was at least 40 people present, 40 people that Jum'ah, or that meet the Jum'ah conditions. What are they? That they are male, mukallaf, they're sane, they're of age, right? Hur, they're free, mustawtinan, they're residents, and la yad'anu shita'an wala sayfan. Yani, they're not just here for the winter, or they're not just here for the summer. No, this is their permanent resident. If they travel because due to an abrupted nature of travel, not that that's what they normally do. And number 6, أن يتقدمها, meaning يتقدم the salah itself, the prayer itself, خطبتان, 2 khutbas. He says, وأركان الخطبتان or الخطبتين 5. There are 5 integrals, 5 arkan, 5 pillars that need to be present in order for us to claim that that khutbah was khutbah Jum'ah. Number 1, hamdullahi fihima, praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in both. Number 2, offering peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in both. Number 3, advising the people to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in both. Number 4, reciting something, a verse, even some of a verse in the first or second khutbah. And number 5 is offering dua upon all of the believers, even something as simple, وَلَوْ رَحِمَكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي الثَّانِيَةِ, in the second one. But there must be dua either in the first or the second. Now, these 2 khutbahs, they have arkan, they have conditions themselves, okay, that if present, then this khutbah is valid. So with the arkan, we said that that it is constituted as a khutbah Jum'ah. But how do we make it valid? It's with these other arkan or shurut. Some will call them arkan, some will say shurut. They mean the same thing. They are integral parts that make it up and make it valid and make it accepted. Number 1, isma'u 40 jama'atan. All the 40 that we said that need to be present, they can hear it. Kalam Jameel. And then there's a debate between Ibn Hajar al-Ramli. Does this mean that they are actually hearing it, or that the voice of the khatib, the one giving the lecture, it is or can be heard by them? Number 2, al-muwala baynaha or baynahuma wa bayna as-salah. After the 2 khutbahs, you pray. No breaks and pauses in between. Number 3, وَطَهَارَةُ الْحَدَثِ الْأَصْغَرِ وَالْأَكْبَرِ. You need tahara for the khutbah. Number 4, وَطَهَارَةُ النَّجَاسَةِ فِي الثَّوْبِ وَالْبَدَنِ وَالْمَكَانِ. Because remember, there is a strong opinion amongst fuqaha within our school and in other schools as well, that the 2 khutbahs are replacing 2 rak'ahs. That's why you need to have wudu. Well, if they're replacing it and you're saying you need to have wudu, then what does that also entail? That your clothes should be clean, your body should be clean, and the place that you are standing on is clean. وَالْقِيَامُ إِنْ قَدَرَ, standing if able. That's number 5 of these conditions. Number 6, وَسَتْرُ الْعَوْرَةِ, covering the private area. For a man who's you need to be male, for this prayer to commence and be accepted and be correct. The private area is from the navel to the knee, with some of the navel and some of the knee. Number 7, وَالْجُلُوسُ بَيْنَ الْخُطْبَتَيْنِ بِقَدْرِ الطُّمَأْنِينَةِ, sitting between both lectures, both sermons, both khutbas, and sit back, take a deep breath. اطمئن, let your body settle, and then get back up. وأن تكون بالعربية. نعم, this is a shart. The lecture needs to be done in Arabic. Oh, well, يعني people don't understand Arabic. That's okay. After the khutbah, you can repeat the whole thing in English. The arkan of the khutbah is your bottom line, meaning those arkan, they are the ones that need to be in Arabic. So yes, if need be, if there's no other way, arguably, if you say the arkan in Arabic and anything extra in English, that would be accepted. Number 9, وَبَعْدَ الزَّوَالِ. What is zawal? It's the sun in the zenith, in the center of the sky. Once it moves from the center towards the west, then that enters into the time of dhuhr. That is the zawal, okay? Or ba'd al-zawal. So as soon as that happens, then the time of dhuhr has begun, and that's also the time of Jum'ah. And then we have janaiz, zakah, and hajj. We'll probably finish these things, inshallah ta'ala, over the next 2 classes, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We're going to stop here. وَلْنَتَّخِذْ مِنَ الْمَوْتِ عِظَةً. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى الإعانة والتوفيق. How come wudu is not required for the mustama' lil khutbah? Jameel. I never heard anyone require this. Kalam Jameel. So that's a very good question. I'd have to say I don't know, actually. I've never heard anyone mention this one. Naam, but since they're not doing anything, okay. Now, that's a very good question. Actually, I'll have to research that one. But from my mutala'a, I've never seen anyone mention this. It could be because they're not doing anything. Now, I'm sure that you're going to find someone that probably said they'd have to keep their wudu on the basis that if they were to speak, they have no jum'ah. And there are some fuqaha that took that too far, to the point where literally if you open your mouth, it's a disaster, right? So I wonder if any of them actually come on that. I honestly didn't think about it, but I'll check it out, and definitely, inshallah ta'ala. It's a very good mas'ala to look into, inshallah ta'ala. Naam, jazakumullah khair. Do you have any other questions? And for the recording purposes, the question was, if we're saying that the khatib needs to have his wudu, why doesn't the listener need to have wudu as well? And that's a good question. I am not aware of that. We'll have to research that one. وَإِيَّاكُمْ أَخِي الْحَبِيبِ. And sorry for the phone call that came, but inshallah ta'ala, we will continue in our next class. Really, it's just going to be over the next 2 classes, because in our next class, we're going to cover al-janaiz, zakah, and probably a big portion of hajj. And then the next one, inshallah ta'ala, the one after that, we'll probably be covering the rest of hajj and a little bit of biyu' and nikah that are present in the book. And that will be done, inshallah ta'ala. Nas'al Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at-tawfiq was-sadad wal-ikhlas. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.